This is my daughter. She plays with computers. We're not quite sure what she does, but it keeps her busy." My father's business associates chuckled politely around the table at Carmine Steakhouse, DC's most exclusive restaurant where senators and lobbyists made deals over $200 steaks. They looked at me with that familiar mixture of pity and condescension. The disappointing daughter who hadn't followed the family path into law or finance. What none of them knew, what my father had never bothered to learn, was that my playing with computers had built the primary cybersecurity infrastructure protecting the United States Department of Defense, and my company held $3.8 billion in active federal contracts. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My father, Harrison Castor, was a man who measured success in billable hours and corner offices. He'd built one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in Washington, representing Fortune 500 companies and occasionally advising presidential campaigns. My older brother followed him into law. My younger sister went to Wharton and now ran a hedge fund. And then there was me, the middle child who'd rather take apart computers than study case law. I discovered coding when I was 11, building my first programs on a second-hand laptop I'd bought with birthday money. By 14, I was finding security vulnerabilities in major websites and responsibly reporting them to companies. By 16, I'd been quietly recruited by the NSA for a summer internship that my parents thought was computer camp. When I told my father I wanted to study computer science at MIT instead of going to Yale Law like he'd planned, he didn't speak to me for 3 months. When I turned down a job at Google to start my own cybersecurity firm, he told me I was throwing away my future on a hobby. That was 12 years ago. In that time, I'd built Sentinel Shield Technologies from a 2-person operation in my apartment to a 340-employee company with offices in DC, San Francisco, and Tel Aviv. We'd developed the encryption protocols used by the Pentagon, created the threat detection systems protecting critical infrastructure across 11 federal agencies, and last year alone had stopped 4 nation-state cyberattacks before they could breach government networks. My work was classified. My contracts were classified. Even my client list was classified, which meant my family had no idea what I actually did, and I wasn't allowed to tell them even if they'd asked. They never asked. Tonight's dinner was one of my father's networking events. He hosted them quarterly, gathering his most important clients and contacts for an evening of expensive food and strategic relationship building. I'd been summoned to attend because one of the guests had a daughter my age who was also single, and my father thought we might have something in common. The daughter turned out to be a corporate attorney who spent 20 minutes explaining why tech startups were overvalued bubbles waiting to burst. I smiled and nodded and counted the minutes until I could leave. My phone had been buzzing insistently in my purse all evening. I'd ignored it because my father had a strict no phones at dinner rule, but the vibrations were getting more frequent. Something was wrong. "So, Victoria," one of my father's partners asked, "Harrison mentioned you work with computers. IT support? Website design?" "Something like that," I said, the answer I always gave. "She's very modest," my father said with a wave of his hand. "She runs a little security company. Mostly corporate clients, I think. Small businesses worried about hackers." He chuckled. "Every generation needs their computer people, I suppose." The table laughed. I felt my jaw tighten. "Actually, I started, but before I could say anything, the restaurant's front door opened and 4 people in dark suits walked in with purpose. I recognized them immediately. Agent Marlowe was leading. I'd worked with him for 6 years. Behind him were 2 members of my own threat response team and a woman I didn't recognize, but whose badge identified her as NSA. "Ms. Castor?" Agent Marlowe approached our table, his face grave. "We need to brief you immediately. There's been a breach attempt on the CENTCOM network. Only you can authorize the countermeasure deployment." The table went completely silent. My father's fork was frozen halfway to his mouth. "How bad?" I asked, already standing. "Level 4. Origin looks like Eastern European, but the signatures suggest state sponsorship. They're targeting the satellite communication protocols, your protocols. You design the fail-safes. We need you to activate them." I grabbed my purse. "Has the secretary been notified? He's waiting for your assessment before escalating to the White House." "Victoria." My father's voice was strangled. "What is happening? Who are these people?" I paused. For 12 years, I'd kept my work separate from my family. For 12 years, I'd let them believe I was playing with computers, running a little security company. wasting my potential on a hobby. Part of it was classification requirements. Part of it was that explaining would have required them to listen, and they'd never been interested in listening. These are federal agents, Dad. I have to go. There's a situation that requires my clearance level. Your clearance level? He looked like he was having trouble processing the words. It's above yours, I said simply. Then I turned and walked out of the restaurant with the agents, leaving behind a table of Washington's elites staring in stunned silence. The next 8 hours were a blur of secure facilities, encrypted communications, and high-stakes decision-making. The attack was sophisticated, a coordinated attempt to compromise military satellite communications that could have blinded our forces in 3 active operational theaters. My team worked through the night, implementing countermeasures I designed 3 years ago for exactly this scenario. By 4 a.m., the threat was neutralized. By 6 a.m., the intelligence community had traced the attack to a specific state actor. By 8 a.m., the Secretary of Defense was on the phone personally thanking me. By 9 a.m., someone had leaked the story to the press. I was still at the secure facility when my phone exploded with notifications. The story was everywhere. Brilliant cybersecurity expert prevents major nation-state attack. Defense contractor Victoria Castor, the woman who saved CENTCOM. $3.8 billion in federal contracts, inside Sentinel Shield Technologies. The stories included details about my company that had never been public before. The scope of our contracts, the agencies we protected, the attacks we'd prevented. Someone high up had clearly decided it was time for Sentinel Shield to step out of the shadows. My father called 17 times before noon. I didn't answer. I finally went home around 2 p.m., exhausted but wired. There was a town car parked outside my Georgetown brownstone. A brownstone my father had never visited, in a neighborhood he didn't know I could afford. He was standing on my doorstep. Victoria. He looked older than he had the night before, like the last 12 hours had aged him. We need to talk. I unlocked my door. Come in. He followed me inside, looking around at the house he'd never seen. The art on the walls, the custom furniture, the security system that was more sophisticated than most government facilities. His eyes stopped on a framed photo on my mantle, me shaking hands with the president at a private ceremony I'd never told him about. I didn't know, he said finally. Victoria, I swear I didn't know. You didn't want to know. I sat down on my couch, too tired to stand. Every time I tried to tell you about my work, you changed the subject. Every time I mentioned a contract or a project, you made jokes about computer games. You introduced me to your colleagues last night as someone who plays with computers. You've been doing that for 12 years, Dad. I thought, he stopped, rubbing his face. I thought you were wasting your potential. You were so brilliant. You could have done anything, law, medicine, finance. Instead, you chose this. This. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. This is protecting the country, Dad. This is making sure hostile nations can't shut down our military communications. This is building systems that keep power grids running and hospitals functioning and planes from falling out of the sky. I paused. This is a $3.8 billion company that employs 340 people and has been personally commended by 2 presidents. He sat down heavily in the chair across from me. Why didn't you tell me? Most of my work is classified. I couldn't tell you details even if I wanted to. I met his eyes. But that's not really why, and we both know it. I didn't tell you because you never asked. Not once in 12 years did you ask me what I was actually working on. You decided when I was 19 that I'd chosen wrong, and you never reconsidered. The news said you prevented a major attack last night, that you're the only person who could have stopped it. I designed the defense systems. I was the only one authorized to deploy the countermeasures at that level. So yes, if I hadn't been there, if I hadn't built what I built, things could have been very bad. My father was quiet for a long moment. I owe you an apology. Not just for last night, for years of not seeing you. For dismissing what you do. For being so certain I knew what success looked like that I couldn't recognize it in my own daughter. Yes, I agreed. You do. I'm sorry, Victoria. I'm truly sorry. I looked at my father, the man who'd built his own empire, who'd never understood why I didn't want to build mine in his image. He looked genuinely remorseful, which was more than I'd expected. Thank you for saying that. Can we start over? I want to understand what you do. I want to know my daughter. Most of what I do, I can't talk about. Classification requirements don't disappear because you've had a change of heart. I paused. But there are some things I can share. And I suppose it would be nice to have a conversation about my work that doesn't end with a joke about video games. He nodded slowly. I'd like that. And Victoria? Those colleagues last night. They've been calling me all morning. Apparently several of them have companies that need cybersecurity reviews. They were very impressed by what they read about you. I smiled slightly. Have them contact my office. Though I should warn you, we're selective about our clients and we're not cheap. I'll let them know. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, your mother would be proud. She always said you'd do something extraordinary. I just couldn't see it. After he left, I sat alone in my living room, exhaustion finally catching up with me. My phone was still buzzing. Interview requests, congratulations from colleagues, messages from government officials. One message stood out. It was from the Secretary of Defense. Outstanding work last night. The President has asked me to convey his personal gratitude. Your country owes you a debt it can never fully repay. I read it twice, then set the phone down. For 12 years, I'd protected systems that protected millions of people, and my own father had thought I was playing games. Now the whole world knew different. Part of me wished it could have stayed secret. I'd never done this work for recognition. But another part of me, the part that had spent years smiling through dismissive jokes and condescending introductions, felt something like vindication. My father had spent his career building a law firm that protected corporations. I had spent mine building systems that protected a nation. Turns out there's more than one definition of success. And sometimes the most important work is the kind that nobody sees, until suddenly everyone does. I closed my eyes and let myself rest. Tomorrow there would be more briefings, more decisions, more invisible work keeping the invisible threats at bay. But tonight, for the first time in 12 years, my father knew exactly what his daughter did for a living. And that was worth more than any classified commendation. The next morning, I woke to even more messages. My siblings had seen the news. My brother, the corporate attorney, had sent a long email apologizing for every time he'd made jokes about my tech startup phase. My sister, the hedge fund manager, had called twice and texted, "Why didn't you tell us? We could have invested." I hadn't needed their investment. I'd built Sentinel Shield with government grants, strategic contracts, and the kind of revenue that came from being the only company capable of solving certain problems. But I appreciated the sentiment, belated as it was. Before heading back to the office, I stopped by my father's law firm. His assistant looked startled to see me. I'd never visited before. She led me to his corner office, where he was on the phone with a client. He hung up immediately when he saw me. "Victoria, I wasn't expecting you." "I know." I sat down across from his desk, the same desk where he'd told me, 12 years ago, that computer science was a phase I'd grow out of. "I wanted to give you something." I handed him a framed certificate. It was a civilian commendation from the Department of Defense, one of several I'd received over the years. This one specifically cited my work, protecting critical national infrastructure from hostile foreign actors. "I thought you might want to put it on your wall," I said, "next to your own awards, so you can remember what your daughter actually does." He stared at the certificate for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "I'll put it right here," he said, placing it on the credenza behind his desk, "where everyone can see it." As I walked out of his office, I passed his wall of achievements, law degrees, partnership announcements, photos with politicians. Soon, my commendation would hang among them. It had taken 12 years, a nation-state cyber attack, and federal agents interrupting dinner. But finally, the Castor family had a new definition of success. And it looked a lot like playing with computers.